I'll introduce these guys or let themselves introduce each other. My name is Rick Cutter, and I'm a partner with a company called Cloud for Utilities, and we run a digital and cloud event annually similar to this, and we're partners with these guys. And but we're more focused on technology. They are too, but they're really heavily on energy, as you see. Our event coming up will be at the Beverly Hilton at the end of August, and we'd love to have you all there. So we've got with us today, I'll let them introduce themselves, Guillermo, Gabe, and Ali from NYPA. And I'll let Gabe start first. Introduce yourself and your company.
Yeah, hi, Gabe Prado. I'm the Director of Product Marketing for our Power and Utilities business at Cognite. So we're actually just up the road here in Austin, Texas. You've heard a lot of talk about data challenges, right? And utilities today have a pretty messy industrial data problem. I see a lot of digital roadmaps where you've got a lot of progress being made on the consumer side, but you have just proof of concept purgatory on the industrial side. And the reality is you have a lot of different unique problems with industrial data, right? There's a lot of different data types. There's a lot of different standards. It is a high effort challenge that's typically being solved manually. So at Cognite, what we do is we introduce some new disciplines around governance, around data quality, around smarter data management so that this data can be used more efficiently in the endless array of business applications. And so our approach is really to think from the data stack outwards rather than competing with all the data standards from the point solution inwards. So really excited to spend some time with these guys and talk a little bit more about automation. My point of view is, you can't have automation in the real world until you fix the automation in your tech stack. So that's where we're at about with Cognite.
Awesome, thanks, Gabe. Guillermo Salazar, co-founder and CEO at ICwhatUC. Prior to ICwhatUC, I was 22 years in data analytics, working for various implementations and putting in SAP. So bringing dreams to life, like we like to say it when we're selling it, but ultimately, ultimately creating a data creation platform and bringing all that data together. And so through years and years of doing that, I ultimately exited and came across a consumer problem that I was experiencing myself around customer service and customer care. And from there, we kind of set, I sat myself and my other co-founder, and we said, this has got to be solved. This is a real problem. And so we started ICwhatUC. And so we're a virtual or visual platform for field assistance. So what we enable is rather than rolling a truck on every single customer care case or every single inspection use case, you take a look first and do an assessment, and use assessment using a built-in to process enterprise virtual platform. So things like, we're all very are very familiar right now with using video calling for all sorts of things. And we're seeing a lot of enterprise field teams trying to use video calling to actually deliver their services. But to Gabe's point, all of that data is lost. And so your opportunities for automation are really impaired because you're not actually capturing that data. So what we do is we help remove all the friction touch points that you would have by trying to use some sort of a proprietary platform for that. And we make it very low friction, one-click connect, that kind of thing, all browser-based technology. Most importantly, all the data is captured inside this system. So all the metadata around GPS, all the data around the specific use cases, even checklists and protocols are all built into the system, so you can do field operations visually. And what we do at the end of it, after every session or every single, all the time, is all that data is then available to be workflowed back and forth. So rather than creating a whole new world of new forms, we create a whole new world of automation based on AI. And all of that feeds back into the systems that Gabe's team builds, back into the workflow systems within the ERPs, so you can start using AI to listen for the work that's being delivered, listen for resolution, look for ways to deflect calls, and ultimately the value proposition that we principally deliver on is eliminating truck rolls. So we take a look at the truck roll cost. Depending on the size of the truck and how many people are in the truck, it can be anywhere from, at minimum, $300 a truck roll for an F-150 and one team member. And then you get into bucket trucks, you get into plane travels, you're up to $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 for a trip. So all those costs and all that GHG, all the TRIF that's related to travel, all of that is a major impact on the ability to deliver field service. And all the processes we do today actually impair our ability to automate field service. And so capturing that data begins to unlock it and decompose it, it puts us in a position where we can begin to digitize field service operations. That's what we do.
Great. Thank you, Guillermo. Can you guys hear me? All right, so I'm going to bring a different view to what we do at NYPA. So we are a utility, nation's largest utility, focused on generation and transmission. We do not have distribution. So just a disclaimer, we do not have any contracts with the I2C2 or with Cognite today. So,
But they're working on it.
they're working on it. Yes, they are working on it. So our journey. So Ali Mohammed, I'm the Senior Director of Digital Innovation and Transformation Office. It's a long title, but what does it mean is I lead the team of individuals that are focused on innovative technologies across the enterprise. So technology and innovation goes to my department. We have R&D, which is focused on hydrogen, focused on thermal storage, focused on drone technology. Then you have the Agile Lab, which is the Advanced Grid Innovation Lab for Energy, which has built the real-time simulation model of the New York transmission grid. So we can apply advanced analytics to say, what if a cyber attack on a piece of asset happens? How did that impact the grid? Then we have the DTO, which is completely different from these two departments, focusing on optimizing efficiencies, energy efficiency gains within the organization, automation. We're looking to build an innovation hub so we can pilot projects like 3D technologies, AR, VR, optimizing efficiencies within the work fees. Then the last piece is the digital workforce team that focuses on digitizing our workforce out in the fields. So it's a balance of all process, people, technology, as well as culture. So let me start with the journey, and the reason why I want to do this is put in context of what a utility has to go through to get ready in order to partner with people like these, right? So our journey began in 2017, 2018, where we embarked on this ambitious journey to be the first end-to-end digital utility. What does that mean? We relied on, utilities relied on commercial carriers for our network needs. But now that more and more data is coming online, we cannot rely on those anymore. We started to build our own fiber optic infrastructure to start collecting the data and transmit data. We installed thousands of sensors out in our generation and transmission assets. So we start collecting data, bringing it back to our ISOC, which got built in 2017, which is the Integrated Smart Operations Center. To date, we have 85,000 data points coming from the sensors, with a goal of 150,000 data points by the end of this year. Then we built the Agile Lab, as well as NYPA, which is the New York Energy Manager, focusing on our customer side, digitizing our customers' assets, and enabling their automation and predictive analytics so they can maintain their assets as well. Because NYPA is a state authority, so we have our obligation to meet those goals, those ambitious goals that the New York State has rolled out, and support our customers, which are the munis and co-ops, state buildings larger than 20,000 square feet. So there are some goals that we talk about, GHG, carbon footprint. So there are goals that they have to meet as well, and NYPA is helping them out. So we started our journey through these processes, collecting the data, ensuring that we have the data available first to begin with. Then the DTO sponsored in 2018 and 2019 the Data Governance Committee within the organization, where we said, okay, now that we are collecting the data, let's see if the data is clean. And as a utility, your bread and butter are your asset information, your assets. But when we did a data quality index on our assets, we found that we were only 69% there for the assets that we maintain over the past several decades. Over the past 2 years, I know it's low, it was shocking to us, but at least we went through that process to identify where the gaps are. So when you look at the 7 functions of data quality, right, accuracy, completeness, if you go through those steps, we found out we were 69%. Over the next 2 years, we had a team dedicated to go and fix the data in Maximo, in other tools that we have that we use today. And today we are at 99% data quality. So now we are at a stage where we can say, okay, it's not garbage in, garbage out anymore. How can we use the data that we have curated and partner with technology firms, not present company included, but partner with them to see how we can derive insights that we can drive efficiencies with, especially productivity in our assets and et cetera, that we can focus on. So that's our journey so far.
To give you guys some credit, so the last project I did while I was still consulting, we did a data governance project for Canada's largest integrated energy company. And for one vertical of the company, one BU, for one object, I think it was vendor, and 8 fields in that vendor. Just for completeness, we were at 21%. So at 69%, you guys are that's incredibly high. And then 99, that's out of hand. So congratulations. That's to the foundation layer. That's amazing.
It is. Thank you. And the reason why we were shocked we were at 69% and not higher is because we started our journey of collecting the data and entering into Maximo in 1995. So we were building the database over time. We have the data with respect to work orders being worked on a particular asset, so we have the asset history, but it wasn't complete. It's the resources that putting in don't fill out each and every single field. So what we did was now we have an automated process where a notification gets sent out to the asset managers, letting them know that these fields are missed. It gives them 2 weeks to complete that process. If it doesn't, it gets escalated to the regional manager. So we are enforcing that the planners, the engineers are putting the accurate information into those systems, and that's going to be the culture going forward.
And I think what's really interesting about this is NYPA is a really good example of a high digital maturity organization. But you look at the broad spectrum of utilities here in the US, and there's a whole spectrum of digital maturity there as well. And not everyone has the same resources or the ability to spend these years getting it right for them. So I think that's where technology has to move in and help enable the entire industry to move a little bit faster. Because as Calvin said, we don't have all the time in the world, right? We need to figure out some of these problems today. We need to solve them sustainably, and we need to build the systems that are going to help us use digital the best we can. So I thought that was interesting.
I think my personal experience, I'm a customer guy, customer service for utilities, and when I talk automation, it's customer self-service and field mobile work and that type of stuff. And one thing that really impressed me is, 10, 15 years ago, it was about route optimization and getting it quicker to the asset and do that field work. And Gabriel say, don't go. Use the application, don't roll the truck. I like that. So it seems to me like we as utilities are now getting to another layer of advanced automation, which is sort of the purpose of this session. So since they don't work together, I asked my friend here, is there a sort of a scenario we could kind of play out for you guys of how their two technologies would solve a problem for NYPA? So I'm going to turn it over to you to kind of throw that out, and then they're going to kind of say how their solutions could work together for a big end-to-end business case.
All right.
No pressure.
No pressure. And let me come up with something. Two of them, one related to NYPA and one related to distribution. We can tackle both so we can see the end-to-end picture. So for decades, NYPA and every utility have relied on manned aerial inspection. The helicopter crews fly out, they capture images, they send it back to the engineers, they inspect the pictures, the images, and then if there's an anomaly, like a rusting or of a joint or corrosion, they send out a crew to visually inspect it. They might have to climb towers at some point to do that. We have gone through that for decades, right? But now the drone technology has enabled us to be very close to these assets, whether you have a live stream coming back, whether you have capturing pictures, images, and bringing it back to the servers. You have that capability today. How can, whether it's I2C2 or Cognite, use the data that we can capture from the drone, whether it's in real time or 15-minute intervals? How can you capture the data and provide insights or direction to the workforce saying that, hey, I see an anomaly here today based on the previous flights, there's something going on here. How can you help optimize or increase the efficiencies of our workforce so we can focus on high priority items, not everything that we see out there?
Sure. I guess I'm lower in the food chain, so I'll go first, right?
No pressure.
So they could usually call this Stump the Chump, but I guess there's two of us this time. So welcome aboard. So I mean, in terms of the context being set there, like one of the things that we do really well in terms of like not just the realization of a problem resolution, but taking the data that's captured in video format and then assessing that against an overall context of what that data is supposed to mean. So things that we do with our customers is we've got narrowly defined use cases, and we have a general understanding from like 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 sessions of what is supposed to be happening within each one of those sessions. And so there's an overall, like there's a model, an ML model of what is supposed to be happening. And so we would take the data that you provided in video and process that through an ML model and begin to identify and tag the certain points within the session, within the video, that that need to be called to attention, that deviate from the norm, I'll put it that way. So whatever the standard is supposed to be, deviates to the positive, deviates to the negative in terms of what's expected to be the result, and then we would communicate that up and break out the individual components of that video, because the video is really blobby, it's kind of hard to use, it's difficult to search, especially if you've got 5,000 of them. I mean, I'm sure everyone in here has got 4,000 pictures in their phone right now they don't know how to get rid of because they don't know how to process that, right? Imagine if you've got, you know, lines and lines of power lines of for NYPA, right? It all looks the same, it all sounds the same, but they're completely different. And so things that we do is we're going to process that and identify that, tag it with GPS, tag it with timestamps, and then a time series it so that you can have a same image of the same video of the same power line year over year over year over year. So your institutional knowledge of what has been seen, heard, and observed is now available in one single spot and can be indexed and searched and validated. And at that point, we don't really process we process it, prepare some preliminary insights, and then we feed back into data systems that begin to consolidate that with the rest of the workflow.
Yeah, because if you take this input, right, it starts to become a pretty big scaling problem very quickly, right? All this data has to go somewhere, has to be searchable later on, has to be referenceable, has to store the metadata, and it's still one piece of the entire process, right? You still have to hand that information to the operator. They have to be able to access it in the field, right? So there's a lot of different points along this chain that have to be connected. And what we do at Cognite is we have that foundational layer where all this data coming from this process, other processes, can start to speak the same language. Because if I think about automating an entire business process, it's only as automated as its weakest link. What happens if, like, you have to hand those photos over via flash drive, right? That still happens in some drone inspections today. There's a weak link in that process. So if we can elevate and contextualize all this data with the entire business process and all the other inputs, the route maps, the metadata with where the lines are, all other operational information around that, how to prioritize, it starts to be a much bigger problem when you're looking at it from a pure data perspective. So we would help contextualize this business process with the broader business process of making sure that our power lines are fully functional, are resilient, are reliable.
Great. I mean, you know, we went through a similar process at NYPA. At first, we did not partner with anyone. What we did was build our data lake. We, through the ETL process, captured everything that we could, transform the data, and add metadata as much as we can, because we know the process is better than anybody else, because we know how things happen within our organizations. So we took that first step. And now we partnered with 20 technology firms where we can say, okay, let's get some use cases out there, see what technology is enabling us to do better at. So we have 20 different firms that we partnered with last year just solely on AI and ML. So now we're starting to roll out use cases.
How did you, just as a I guess a point of question or point of reference here, how did you guys put the business case together for that data lake? Like, what was the value proposition?
So for us, it was easy because first thing you need to do is have your leadership buy-in. You know, once we had that, it was actually a top-down approach. When we started to build our networks out, we started to build the sensors out, we started collecting data. We're at a point where we have almost 2 petabytes of data just from some of the applications that we have today. We're not even talking about unstructured data, that we're getting into that phase now where we're doing data discovery on those. We saw the volume of data that we have that can be leveraged to make better insights. So it was easier for us to justify saying, we have this data, we know what we want to do with it. Do we have the power to be, or the authority to go ahead and support this? That's when, the DTO at that point reported into the executive office. That made it much easier, where we co-sponsored with IT, because IT ultimately is the enabler, ensuring that your cybersecurity processes are there, policies are there, right. Ensuring that data transfer happens between companies. So all that was taken out in partnership. So we co-sponsored with IT to establish this whole data governance committee.
And I think what's really interesting when you say you partner with 20 different vendors, right, that gets complex in itself. And so I think we're having to move from this reality today where there's a lot of competing standards and a lot of competing interoperability challenges towards a more open ecosystem. And that's where our technology is really trying to shift that paradigm, right? The future is open. Everything needs to work with itself. Data is kind of that common thread. But we have to get to that smart grid, to get to that system of systems where things are efficient, things are working in tandem, we have to shift the fundamental mentality from closed ecosystem to open ecosystem. And I think that's a really exciting opportunity, and that's where we need to go.
Just to add on to that, and the reason why we did that was, there's a lot of jack of all trades, master of none, right? Everybody says we do AI ML. Yeah, but we want to see what you do. So the RFP was more structured into the different layers of AI ML. Do you have capability with computer vision? What does your talent team look like? What are some of your past experience or work with your clients that you have done? So we broke it down further. So now we have capabilities identified for each vendor that when we have a use case, we can go directly to them. So that's the process that we took to enable, so they had some niche capabilities and experiences under their belt.
Y'all want to do the other scenario, or should we move into some questions?
Well, I mean, there's a there's a consumer scenario that we talked about. We just heard one today, right? So we were chit-chatting with some folks, just talking about the scenarios that we're dreaming up for this discussion, and I guess at the end of the day, there's a lot of consumers or endpoint issues that we still suffer through as consumers for energy, and you guys are not in distribution, so you don't feel that, you don't touch that directly, but the scenario I heard today was something maybe everyone here has probably experienced to some sense of degree. Is like largely, the fellow was sharing a story where he's sitting having a cup of coffee in the morning. He looks outside in his backyard, and he starts seeing this transformer just blows up in front of him in his back, on the pole in his backyard. And he calls up the transmission company or distribution company, sorry, and he says, "Hey, look, it was Austin Energy actually." And he said, there you go. I'm not going to name any names, but and he calls him and says, "Hey, by the way, my transformer just, for starters, let's walk through the process, right? The awareness phase. He's realized, okay, so my transformer just blew up. I should do something, right? So presumably, I didn't check this, but like you Googled it, so what do I do? Got a 1-800 number, right? So he calls customer care at Austin Energy. Voice prompts his way through the sequence of whatever you got to pick. Probably, if he's like me, hit 0 and just waited for somebody to come on the line. And then finally got somebody. When he finally got through to that person, he said, "Hey, my transformer just blew up. You probably should get somebody out here to take a look at it, right? Assess." And they said, "No, sir, I'm sure what you've just seen is a squirrel being electrocuted. It will be all just fine." And he said, "Yeah, totally charged." And at which point he said, "No, that's not the case. I've got no power. I'm calling him a cell phone. You need to roll a truck." And they rolled the first truck, a bucket truck, a smaller bucket truck. And this team gets there, 3 people, so you start doing the math, $1,000, right? They get that out there, a three-man bucket truck, and they evaluate the situation, realize they're not equipped to solve the problem. So then they roll the bigger bucket. This is like a Goldilocks story, right? The bigger bucket truck comes out, and they're both looking at the problem, going, "Geez, I've never seen a transformer like this before. Have you ever seen one before? This is a glass one. I've never seen a glass transformer in ages. Have you ever, And they're exchanging information around what they could do and they could solve it. So they got to call the third truck out because there's been some spill of chemical that was inside they found this PCBs all over the ground on the base of the power pole. And so all these things are all assessment, right? Because the service has been bundled into a single use case or into a single event. And so, in our discussion, it was like, well, if there was actually was a way to be able to assess that virtually, we would have and uploaded that data into a workflow that you begin to understand what we're looking at without having the expertise there, because we're running out of 30-year technicians, everybody. And that knowledge needs to be institutionalized within our systems, so you can use something like video to be able to capture the information, use AI to decompose it, assess it, roll it into systems like yourself so you can kick off the right workflow, so the right truck goes the first time with the right parts and the right people, so that we're not delaying the ability to bring resilience back to the network. And this happens across every single utility all around the world every single day. The problem is really, and it's this, and talking about data isn't as sexy or as fun as talking about automation, but the reality is that getting these foundational layers in place are critical prerequisites to being able to execute on an automation vision. And the fun part about the story for the utilities business is that the use cases for a lot of these automation opportunities can be very narrow and deep. So there's high volume and narrow use cases that can start being used as an experiment into how we can achieve this automation. And so you can coexist in a semi-automated or in an automated work process and an unautomated or traditional work process, and begin to learn how to do automation to your organizations and build business cases that can be validated on a quarter-by-quarter basis instead of saying, hey, we're going to take the next 2 years and build a data layer to try and get to 99%. That's not going to get funded, right? And so building funding arrangements so that you can begin to show value early, often, repeatedly, and then at the same time learning in micro loops so you can start extending that use case. Because what's going to happen, and you guys will see this, you see this all the time, and I'm sure you've seen it in your vendors, is that what you understand from a technology, what's possible from a technology perspective when you first start that learning loop, and what's possible when you finish is totally changed. Because the technology that was available when we started our company 2 years ago is completely different than the technology we're using today. And it's stuff that we built, we innovated, we got an awesome tech team, and it's stuff that just came out that was emerged by the different ecosystem of technology players. But the problem still stayed the same that we're trying to solve.
And I think to kind of build on that a little bit, right? A lot of the problems that we're having to solve now are multidiscipline and high context, right? Being able to put all the pieces together in an imperfect system and have enough information to go out with your best guesstimate. And I think that's something that today is done manually. It's a subject matter expert who kind of knows how the operation, who knows how the process works, can put that together just like that. But if we're losing a lot of these skilled workers from the workforce, we have to replace that. And this is one area where I always try to think about AI and machine learning as a really powerful tool, right? AI and machine learning has gotten to a point where you can now approximate some of that context and build relationships in your data sets so that it becomes easier to then go out on that truck roll and have everything that you need at one place. Where in the back end, it's from all sorts of different systems, right? And that's where I think if we really want to get serious about automation, we have to figure out how do we structure the business process to kind of take advantage of this new technology and make it work for us. The technology is there. It's a matter of kind of adoption. Yeah. Any comments?
I would actually share a story that I've learned at NYPA, where we partner with GE Predix to collect data from our assets. We've started building our asset classes in GE Predix to do advanced pattern recognition. Using smart signal, it identifies anomalies, tells you what the high priority alarms are and what you need to focus on. We kept getting this alarm at one of our locations in Queens, New York, and nobody knew what to do with it at first because it was just an anomaly detected. We sent the crew out there to see what's going on. They looked at the transformers, they looked at all the equipment surrounding the transformer, they looked at the battery banks, they looked at everything that they could find. The issue was a $10 washer. Yeah, it just went bad, and the device itself was out of the range of a normal operating, whatever the thresholds are. A single $10 washer could have taken an outage that have cost millions per day for our plant. So using APR, using AI, ML, and others definitely would be helpful. And to date, we have, from cost avoidance and everything, if you look at what we have, the business case, right? You justify why we do this. It's because we've already saved over $43 million in avoided cost just using these technologies to date that we have. And those have been actually vetted by, when you looked at the formula, we had industry experts come take a look at what we derived to make sure it's accurate, and it was vetted by several partners of ours to make sure that the data, and we're being conservative. $43 million is being conservative of how much have you already saved to date.
Let me ask you guys a question. What do you think some of the priorities for these types of advanced automation should be for utilities? And I'll start with you, Gabe, and wrap up with Ollie.
Yeah, I think the priority is really to figure out how this technology can be applied to your workflow, right? I think the last thing you want is disrupting something too much and causing too much churn in your organization. So I think a better approach is really to start pretty small on a pretty defined problem and start to build your data around that problem, right? And it could be contextualizing one or two differently. Maybe it's an image to a time series, right, to an asset. So you're starting to build, and we're getting a little deep into data models, but you're starting to build a data model that can solve multiple problems and then can be augmented and built on over time. So that progressively you're solving more pieces of that entire value chain without having to kind of disrupt the apple cart all at once. So I think what we see our customers being most successful at is when they start small and can kind of have that vision for what's the end goal and just have a really pragmatic approach and the right tools for building that process over time. So again, you're not throwing a bunch of stuff at the wall early on. You're starting small and you're building on it. And then you can reuse that same work for a similar business process, right? That's how we get to scale, and that's how we keep from blowing out our IT costs, right? We have to keep that in check. You can do it manually. It's really painful. It takes a lot of effort, or you can get a little bit smarter, and the technology is there to enable that.
That's wonderful. I think that so
Ditto.
our experience is trying to come into this disruption to existing process has really challenged the conventional understanding on what data looks like. So like the idea that video, so we talk a lot about how video is the new document, right? So we pick fights with 1-800 numbers. I pick a fight with the form all the time because I hate them. I hate 1-800s, I hate forms, I hate lines, I hate all those things, built a company around it. And those things are things that we challenge all the time, is that why are we filling out forms anymore when we can use AI to answer the question? Why are we doing, if it's a compliance issue, let's test for compliance, let's create checklists, let's do all those things, but make it all automated and prompted so that people aren't, fussing with these legacy tools. Like, we can't forget a lot of the work processes we have today, they go back like 100 years. Like 100 years ago, if you had a problem with your butter churner, you called the butter churning guy, and he said, "Could you hold, please?" And he came out and he said, I'll be out there Thursday. Do you mind being around between noon and 5? He said, fine, because I'm working the fields. And they came out at noon and 5, and they said, oh, sorry, I don't have the spindle for that. I have to call Jake. He's going to come out and get it, and he knows how to fix that butter churner, and he'll be back. Do you mind not having butter for 2 weeks? It's the exact same story we live through today. And that convention has to stop. And so we start thinking about how we can actually begin to change the way we process information. We prioritize the efforts that we're going to do and realize that there are use cases out there that are within the broad scope of work processes that exist in utilities. There are narrow and deep process and work, I'll say task level things that we can start considering to automate that are low risk. And to Gabe's point, let's learn from that and execute on that and know that there's a bit of a muscle memory that needs to get established within the organization around challenging the way we do things. And then you just begin to challenge yourself a little bit further, add a little more complexity to the work task, a little more complexity to the technology, and deploy. And it gets a little bit, it kind of starts catching a lot of momentum, and you start telling, there's a lot of internal marketing needs to happen to celebrate the existing stories. So it's choosing something that is small, has a lot of depth to it in terms of volume, that you can tell a good story on, that touches all the priorities in the executive mandates, and that you can begin to mobilize for further automation. Because it's that change that's going to have to happen within the kind of the convention of how work is delivered, and then there's the people part of it, and managing the people change and the resistance to doing things differently. That needs to come from these small victories and small wins and the momentum play. So I would say, in prioritization is that getting that momentum play moving and starting with this, the snowball effect, getting that going so that you can achieve the objective. One of the things that we've heard from our customers is that they look back after 52 weeks and they can't believe the progress they've made, because they've started, it's like that marathon adage where it starts with one step at a time, and they just start with 1 step, 2 step, 3 step, and eventually they completed it after the end of the year. And it's remarkable. And then we get a lot of comments from customers and their customers. We've got one of our utilities in their customer care area has like a 9 out of 10 customer care satisfaction rate. They're like, this is completely unheard of, right? Because they're bringing their customer and they're involving their customer in resolution. They're engaging them instantly. They're treating them like it's a competitive industry. They're treating like a shopping experience instead of a care experience. And those kind of mental shifts really can begin to translate into significant inputs at just base level, so you can get to broader automation opportunities in the whole organization.
I just want to add something to that, right? There's also a pretty significant risk in not changing, right? If you don't, we can reduce the risk from a cost perspective with technology, but also if you don't adopt it, if you're not serious and you don't have that roadmap and that urgency, there's a big risk of not doing anything as well. So I wanted to add that.
Let me go back to butter first, and I'm glad that Jake made it here on time, so we had butter for lunch with our bread. But no, when you look at prioritization, the first question is, what are you trying to solve? What is the business outcome that you're looking to achieve? If you don't answer that first question, then there's no point in going to the next step after, right? So that's how we took our approach as well. Every use case, and I'm giving an example, right? So we looked at RPA. A little off topic, but it's a good story. We started with RPA in 2018, 2019. We said, oh, this is a great technology. We don't have millions of customers where we can automate those processes. We don't have that much data to process, to automate. We started with Blue Prism. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that technology. Heavy coders required. Where we ran into issues then is they were getting too expensive onshore, so we have to go with offshore coders. Now you run into cybersecurity issues where you cannot give them access to data because they're not within the US. So we ran into this loop for months and months, and we spent $1.5 million. At the end, there was no outcome. There was no one use case that went into production. So we said, okay, let's take a step back. Let's look at what are you trying to solve first, not just throwing 150 use cases in the pipeline to say, here, we can automate all of this. Does it make sense? What is the value that you're going to get out of these use cases? How much efficiency are you going to gain from it? Are you just saving 0.25% of an FTE? Is it even valuable? Or looking at things that you do over and over and over again that now you don't have to do it, where you can upskill employees and say, here, we're putting these new technologies out here. This is what you can learn and use your time elsewhere. So those are the things that we had started to address internally, and culture is a big change. And when I first introduced myself, I said people, process, technology, and culture. Typically, utilities, they don't focus on culture because they're used to doing things in a certain way year over year. They don't like to change. But we actually went through the whole process. We have a whole culture department, change management department within HR that is focused on whenever these new technologies come out and we're looking to implement, we loop them in. They help us send the communications out to the groups to enable them, to help them understand that this is benefiting them. Automation, people sometimes think, especially when you're working with union, is you're taking their job away from them. We run into that every single day. But no, communications will help them understand that, no, we're not taking the job away, we're making it more efficient so we can do more within the time that we have. So I think that's something that we learned the hard way, but we actually caught up to where we are today.
Just one comment on that. So we don't use the word automation when we talk to our customers. We talk about worker assistance, even though the roadmap is an automation roadmap, because of the change management issues with that, right? We have a lot of friction points when we start talking about automation. And so it's that language, although we are automating it, it is, but it's just such a, there's a bit of a boom with that word. And so we try and avoid that word.
We went through phases too. I called it Digital Workflows Program. I called it so many other names until we came up with
everything else.
Advanced Learning Initiative stands for Ali, right? So that's where we are.
Let me ask one more. I'm gonna copy that. Let me ask one more quick question, then we'll open up the audience for our last 5 or so minutes. But great stuff. What are some of the challenges from an industry perspective to getting to these types of automation programs? Every utility's not doing what NYPA's done. I think they probably all strive to be, but I'm curious what the three of you guys think about. What are how do we get that moving forward in our industry?
You want me to start?
Yeah, you start.
Sure.
Yes, sir.
So I talked about getting the data ready. That's one component, making sure it's curated, it's clean data that we can leverage. The other is talent. And going through this whole great resignation period, it's challenging, especially utilities don't pay like the private sectors pay, right? So it's challenging for us to find the right talent to do this. And that's why we have these MSAs in place with technology firms that we can attract and use them, or be partners with them in understanding what can be achieved. So I think that's something that we do periodically. So NYPA being a state authority, we have to follow the New York State procurement laws. But even though we are part of the state family, our procurement guidelines are a little different because we are a little progressive compared to the other agencies and authorities. So we have some flexibility there. So that's why we create these MSAs in place. So talent is definitely one thing that utilities do not have. Don't think that we can do everything that's out there. We cannot. That's the fact. So we need to have these partners in place to enable all the automation or whatever technologies, whatever you want to call it, to achieve those.
Next. Real quick, because we're going to move to audience questions.
Yeah, you bet. I think that the point about the people is probably the important part. There's going to be some coalition building that has to happen. You've got to understand that where you're covered off in terms of technology, an economic sponsor, a champion for the role, and there's a reality that there may be a new workforce required, which is a great opportunity to unbundle some of the work that's being done.
Yeah, and just from an upskilling perspective, right? I think what a lot of people are missing, you guys hired some really smart people. A lot of times what's happening is they're starved for data that makes sense for them. They need to be able to discover it, they need to be able to use it, they need to be able to understand what it means without having to go through a 2 to 3 week process of working with that data team, right? So if I think of the future kind of belongs to these data products that you can understand, that you can start to use across your organization, and that's how you build from within. That's how you make your really smart people even more effective.
Can I just add one data point to his point?
Please.
So and then we're done. There's a really interesting discussion around like the shape of our workforce in the next 5 years, right? And what you talk about for frontline workers in the U.S. is 151 million frontline workers, and right now it's about 60-40. 60 are like what we'll call on-site remote workers, and 40% of them are information workers that do deliver work virtually, or can work remotely, I should say. What they're projecting right now is there's going to be a 20 million worker shift over the next 5 years. And what's going to be very interesting to see is that they attribute that shift predominantly to the all of these physical workers and all those tasks being delivered by physical workers being delivered by information workers. And so the opportunity from a people perspective is longer careers, safer careers, kind of more information intensive operations for some of this work that was delivered previously physically. And so that kind of thing is a bit of the opportunity that's ahead of us in terms of inspiring those that are faced with a change or the challenge around talking about automation, is that this is a natural evolution that's going to be happening. And in order to attract people into industries like utilities that may or may not have the same cachet as a technology firm or whatever, we're actually creating information jobs inside these industries that are 5, 6, 7, 8, 10x more productive than existing roles. So these companies can afford to now pay them more because they're delivering more and they're much more highly productive and more reliable. So I'll just finish off on that.
Thank you very much. Questions from the audience? Yes, sir. Wait 1 second. The young man's coming with the microphone now. They're recording you, so you're going to be live on YouTube any day now. Oh, this guy's first.
Thank you. Check one.
Sounds great.
I think this is largely a question for Ali. And you touched on this a minute ago with talking about procurement. We've been talking a lot about the value in starting small and like getting like early value and then like iterating from there and being agile and being fast, and other like really excellent ideas which kind of conflict with traditional RFP processes. So how could you speak a bit to how you are adjusting your procurement to be more agile and be faster, and what changes you may have made and what changes you see coming down the line?
So typical timeline for procurement is anywhere from 3 months to a year, right? That's what we see in utilities. So what I call is the MSA is a master service agreement. So what we do is we send out an RFP with a number of scenarios where we think there's multiple vendors or partners, what I usually call them, have the capabilities. So we bring them on board, go through the process, go through the terms and conditions up front, so we don't have to go through it every time we issue a purchase order to them. So there's a set value that we have to go to the Board of Trustees for approval. And say, for example, we have the 20 firms that we have, say, I'll just throw a number out there, fictitious number, $50 million. So now we have the authority to spend up to $50 million on AI ML technologies or use cases with partners. So it's not a true number. So that's how we do. So now a use case comes up, we know who those niche capability partners are. We send them the scope of work as soon as we give them like 2 to 3 weeks to respond. Sometimes they're quicker. So once we get those, we issue the purchase order in less than like a week or two. So that's how we are being agile, saying, okay, if one doesn't work, okay, hop on to the next one. Fail fast, but like you said, fire fast, right? That's something I learned yesterday from it. Fail fast, but make sure that you move on to the next one. You failed on this, that's fine. Get up and move on to the next one.
Maybe an answer from a vendor perspective. Like, and I'm sure you guys have the same story. I mean, we live by POCs. That's part of our sales cycle. Like, first year for all of our engagements is typically below what's the standard threshold for publicly traded organizations. And so our whole model is build in POC, deliver value, publish the heck out of it, and market, and then build that build case, that get in budget for the next year, so that you're actually formally part of budget and part of procurement standards. So, and then, I mean, the trick that we do as vendors, everyone knows this, is we build the use case so defined to within us being the best, the prime candidate for the response, that you kind of like, we used to call it wired, but you ultimately end up wiring the RFP for your result.
I can't believe you just gave out that secret.
I know, right? I know. I'm sitting
wow.
right here. Okay, I had my
No
ears
one's
closed.
never heard of a wired RFP before.
Let me ask a follow-up question. I like that question. Is I do a lot of procurement stuff too with clients on my other consulting business, but it seems like these type automation components would be difficult to fix price from an RFP. Government utilities like fixed price. How do you handle that? Because I'd either say it's unattainable or it's $80 million because I'd be scared of the fixed price.
So it is, right? So the vendor doesn't see what the cost of the MSA is. It will be $0 for them. When you receive the contract, it's $0. We know internally what the value is and how much we can spend. But when we go with awarding a contract, we say best in class, not the lowest. We don't go with, say, here's the lowest bid. We go with best in class technology solution. That's the key phrase that we use to go around and say, okay, we think vendor A is better, but they're the most expensive, but there's a reason behind why they're more expensive, because they have the right talent, they have the right experience, and they have solved this with other clients before.
Okay.
So they're charging for the experience. It's not charging for the technology itself.
Gotcha.
So we have ways that we can go around and say, we want to partner with so-and-so because of these reasons.
Okay.
So we go through that process a lot all the time.
That's great. I think we had another question.
I think
Thank you.
No problem.
Starts as a bit of an observation for Guillermo, but I'll finish it with a question that any of you can pick up. You were talking about the story that started with the electrocuted squirrel.
There's a joke in there somewhere too.
that sounded an awful lot like me to triage in a hospital. And there's been obviously a lot of very utilities-focused conversation here, but what I haven't heard across the event a huge amount is where lessons can be learned from other industries. And I'm curious, and any of you pick this up, which industries and lessons do you think are ripest and best placed to be adopted within utilities?
Yeah, so from our perspective, the data challenge is common across industry. Cognite started in oil and gas, but we look at all these sister verticals for us, manufacturing, power and utilities. The industrial data challenge is pretty specific. It's pretty nuanced, but that's where we have to start, right? For automation to really become mainstream, for this huge ROI to digitization to fall and land and start to make sense, we start with the industrial data problems. So again, it's less exciting to talk about. It's not a squirrel getting electrocuted. It's stuff like governance. It's stuff like quality. It's stuff like model management. These are the things that I think are less exciting to talk about, but can really make or break how you can use data efficiently in your organization. And this is the next class of data problems that we're solving. Again, we see the exact same stuff in oil and gas and in manufacturing. It's the same pain points day in, day out.
So if you're suggesting that great artists steal, I would agree with you 100%. The gal that does our data science for computer vision, she used to do it for when you do the lung X-ray machine associations to try and look for cancer. That's what she used to do. And so the computer vision models are basically the same. We adapt them to looking for utility type objects, and it's that kind of thing. And so basically, you're dead on. We're trying not to invent anything here. We want to try and copy as much as we possibly can.
And I'm going to butcher this, but the saying that she uses steel.
Let him bring you the mic. They're recording this. Sorry to make you answer again.
Butcher on the mic.
Just make me embarrassed now that I can't remember the full phrase, but there's a phrase, and somebody can help me out here, about It's something like amateurs borrow and professionals steal, or so, something like that. That's not the exact one, but
That's about right. I mean, and I think that you look at the world right now in terms of how all the technology is stitched together. Like, if you're creating your own connectivity software, you're a fool because you should have used Twilio. If you were setting up your own hardware server stack, you'd be fool because you can get it for free from Google, Amazon, Azure, whoever, right? So all these different things is understanding all the different pieces that you can patch together to make your recipe.
Can I just add on to that 1 second? I'm sorry. From a utility perspective, so we embarked on the end-to-end digital utility. We had our roadmap built in 2017, but technology changes, evolves every 3 years. So we did a refresh in 2020. We had to stop because of COVID and everything, but we kicked back up. We actually benchmarked ourselves not only against the utility peers, but also across industry to see where we stand. The results were not that great. You could see the frown on the leadership's face. But we know what are the gaps that we need to focus on. Similarly, when it comes to data management, looking at use cases, analytics use cases, we partner with a consulting firm to look at different use cases, not only from the industry perspective, utility industry perspective, but across that can be leveraged at NYPA as well when it comes to finance, things like that. It's not utility specific use cases, but we built things like over 100 use cases that we came up with now that we have a pipeline that we're going to work on for the next 3 to 5 years on those use cases. Those were actually, I would say, 20 to 30% were not utility specific at all.
And I love, Ali, what you said about partners, right? Looking at your vendor space as partners. I think when you work with software partners, you share some of that risk, right? Utilities have a business to deliver power reliably, right? That should be, they're software components, but they're not inherent software companies. So I think when you find these strategic partnerships, you share that risk over that software company who's building the same platforms for other utilities as well, right? So you're kind of crowdsourcing this IP, and you're sharing the risk with others. So I think it's pretty important.
I think we got a question here.
Can you hear me? No.
I think you have to push the button up.
Can you hear me?
No. Can you help her with the mic?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
There you go. Yes.
Great.
Got to say now. Can you hear me now?
Now. Thank you. I'm in networking, and that is my question. I know that standards are very important for utilities, especially when it comes to networking equipment. But as you're coming up with all of these cool use cases, all this data mining, what are the standards that are wrapped around this that make you comfortable that it's passing the security aspects, that it's passing the interoperability? Is there a standards body that's kind of wrapping a bow around this?
We do. We have our own internal controls business department that just looks at every policy and procedure that's out there pertaining to every business unit. Now, when we start deploying these technologies, one of the inherent risks is cyber. Our cyber team has evolved over the past few years, coming up with new standards, just ensuring that our data is safe, right? We want to make sure that our data is safe, is secure, it's not going into the wrong hands. So I think over time we have seen, especially on the cyber side, if that evolved, I think even the team has grown to double its size now because there's more emphasis on data. You look at everything that's going on in the world, there's a lot of cyber threats. When we do our analysis, there's over 2 million hits a day at NYPA outside of the US that we tackle on, and there's not even 1% of it that gets allowed in. So I think cyber is where we definitely focus on a lot to make sure that our data is safe, secure, and then looking at overall IT perspective, there's governances in place that we had to develop. When the data governance structure committee was put together, there were different aspects of it that we had to address, whether starting off with metadata, with business glossary, then getting into the processes for transferring data. Once that's outlined, because it might be different if you're partnering with, say, a vendor A or partner B, there might be different protocols that you might have to follow. All those were already vetted by cybersecurity up front to enable that going forward.
I've got time for one more question. Any more questions? All right. Why don't you guys close this out? Do a quick little summary for each of you.
So I would say just one statement from me that we took at NYPA is treating your data as an asset. We have done a tremendous job as utility members maintaining our assets. the transformers, the transmission lines, the distribution infrastructure. But once you start treating data as an asset is where you'll be successful getting to a place where you can derive insights to make decisions on your O&M and anything going forward, right? So I think that's where we believe in, and we do treat data as an asset. That's the slogan that we use all the time within NYPA.
Cool. As it relates to automation, we have a kind of hypothesis, or at least an understanding that we are going to be pushed into an automation reality because of the lack of supply. We're not going to have enough workers to do the work. Demand is increasing at 50% CAGR for this kind of work, and we don't have the people to do it. And so we're in a position where what seems to be a 5-quarter problem away, it's actually a problem that's affecting us right in near present. And so taking a look, we've got utilities that have 150, 160, 200 teams, workforce teams. They can't hire new people to replace them. So they're retiring and they're not coming back. But their demand for work, their PBRs, their rate cases, those are all coming up and they've got to do more work. So they're in a situation where they have to do more now. And so it's not a function of, it's becoming less of a priority around the demand for automation. It's that we're losing the people to do the work. So my case for urgency is recognizing that there's critical understanding on how your assets are lasting longer than your people. And those people are leaving. And so there's a significant enterprise risk in not addressing automation as a strategy to mitigate your people risk and your asset risk.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And to kind of what you said earlier, context matters, right? If that squirrel had a little bit more context, he'd be in a different place, right? So I think a lot of the problems, a lot of the bottlenecks in automating a process are tied into context. And where we're at today is we can approximate a lot of this context and kind of shift how our subject matter experts are used a little bit more efficiently and sustainably. So I guess my advice is look for those areas of high context problems and figure out how you can start to equip the technologies to bring that context into your organization. Context is evergreen.
Guys, I'm going to ask y'all, if you don't mind, over by the coffee machine outside, maybe hang out there a minute in case anybody has a question they want to ask offline just for a couple of minutes. And thank you so much for your time preparing for today. Really appreciate it. Thank you guys for
Thanks,
being
everyone.
here. Thank you.